Thanks, Niall. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I guess I should start by saying I don't consider myself in any way to be an expert on psychologically informed environments, and I think that's one of the reasons I agreed to do this today. I think what I'm hoping to get across is the fact that it doesn't have to be really complicated and you don't have to be an expert. So hopefully, when I explain a little bit about how I led on creating a psychologically informed environment at Rock Trust, that will be reassuring for anyone who's embarking on that journey. How did we get started on our journey to become a psychologically informed environment? Well, it all started at an organisation, Lawady. So our chief executive gave an input to the whole organisation, and she highlighted some of the concept of PI, and it all sounded really exciting and really great. And I think everyone left really enthusiastic, and I certainly know I did. And then I was kind of pulled to one side in a meeting and told that I was to take the lead on creating a psychologically informed environment. And then the reality sunk in that, oh, wow, okay. So how did we go about doing that? Well, the first thing that we did was I tasked all the managers of the service delivery teams to identify PI champions from each of the teams, from all the different projects. And they set about their task and done some initial research. So they've done some online work. They spoke to other organisations who were working in this way. I guess that work all culminated in a visit to St Basil's in Birmingham, England. So a group of staff went down to Birmingham, shared some learning with the staff and the service users of St Basil's. And what we got from that was we got a team of staff returning to Scotland really, really enthused, really, really excited, full of great ideas and huge ambition in terms of what they had heard from St Basil's and the impact that creating a psychologically informed environment had on the staff and the people who were using the services of St Basil's. And the first thing that the group reported back to us was that if we were really going to make this work, it wasn't enough just to have the frontline staff who were doing the face-to-face work with service users, as Gerard alluded to earlier on. It had to be an organisational approach. And so the first thing we did, we identified champions in all the different parts of the organisation. So from the admin team to the fundraising team to the finance team. And we established what we called a PI working group. And so as well as driving forward the work that we were doing to create a psychologically informed environment, we kind of stressed to the PI reps that it was really their role to take on a bit of a leadership role within their own team to make sure that they were challenging their own team if there was anything that was going against what we were trying to achieve, but also that it was their role to feed up from the team if there was anything that was going on from management level that was kind of going against what we were trying to achieve. And quite quickly, actually, we began to see some changes in the behaviour and the language that people were using. And it was great as a manager to see that something that we had tried to do a lot of at Rock Trust over the years was to encourage people to be more reflective and to give feedback. And I think people had become really comfortable with sharing positive feedback, but a lot of people were much less comfortable giving constructive feedback. But what we found was that once people became familiar with the concept of PI and started thinking in a much more trauma-informed way, they found that a really easy outlet to actually give some critical feedback to their colleagues. And what you would often hear, if you went to one of the offices, you'd often hear another staff member challenging someone saying, well, that's not very PI, or do you think that could be a little more PI? And it was a really nice way. It felt like a really safe way that people actually started to challenge each other about their own practice. And so that was the first meaningful change that we began to see. And I suppose then we reached the first hurdle. I suppose as the person who was asked to lead on this work, and I guess as a group, I think we started to think, how far can we go with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of passion before we get found out that we actually don't really know what we're talking about here? And so there was a few months, if you like, of procrastination where we didn't really make an awful lot of progress. And I suppose the breakthrough for us was discovering the work that Robin Johnson pulled together on the PI-Link website. And the link's in the slides there. But as Ger said, anyone who's not familiar with it, it's an amazing resource. And that's something that really helped us kind of kick on to the next level. And the first thing we identified that was going to be helpful for us was to do some training for the PI reps, just to make them feel a little bit more confident. And so we arranged some training, and then we felt we were at the stage where we wanted to carry out some PI self-assessments. So the way we did that is we used Robin Johnson's Pizazz self-assessment. And, these are the 5 different areas that Ger alluded to earlier on. So I won't go over them again, but those were the areas that we agreed that we would assess ourselves on as an organisation. And again, Ger's already alluded to these, so I won't spend too long speaking about them. So how we did this was each team spent half a day within their own team, and the PIREPs took a lead on carrying assessments. And we used a scale of 0 to 10, so 0 being poor, 10 being advanced. And what each team did was they scored themselves on this scale to say how well they felt the individual team was performing in terms of becoming or being psychologically informed. And the way they did that was we asked what things are helping us to do well in this area, what evidence can we bring to back that up? What things are hindering us in this area? And again, what evidence is there to back that up? And then what can we realistically do to improve the score? And I guess realistic is quite an important concept there, because there's no point making plans to do things that you can't achieve. It really has to be something that's realistic. So that was something that we really kind of made sure that the staff were really clear on. And from those, we came up with some PI action plans. So each team had an individual action plan that laid out their tasks and their goals that they felt would help them become more psychologically informed and see that score increase. And what we noticed was there was quite a lot of themes emerging from individual teams, that rather than have all the teams working separately, we kind of gathered those together in an organisational action plan that kind of swept all those common themes up. And we scheduled in a 6-month review so that the teams could review progress, they could do a reassessment of the scores, and then they could update the action plans. And we continue that to this day. We have ongoing 6-month reviews, we update action plans, and most importantly is that we make sure that we're sharing that with all our colleagues. We make sure we're sharing the successes, but we also make sure we're sharing the challenges. And in the first few reviews across the board, I think we've seen scores increasing every 6 months. But as new projects emerged and as new staff came in and as new challenges present themselves, some of the scores would fluctuate, they would go up and down. That wasn't a bad thing, that was just an opportunity to say, okay, what do we need to do to try and get the score back up again? And I just wanted to finish really by pulling out some examples of the impact that had, not just on the services, but also on the staff. And so one of the first tasks that came from the very first action plan was, in my team, that we asked staff to come into the building and imagine it through the eyes of a young person who was accessing the building for the very first time. And I actually did this. It was a really useful exercise. I'd encourage anyone who hasn't done it to actually do it, because it was really, really eye-opening. And interestingly, I think we probably had the opposite problem than the one that Ger kind of described earlier on. So our office in Edinburgh is in, quite a grand street. It's the kind of street where you might expect to see paparazzi camped out if there was a minister or an MP involved in some kind of scandal. It's really one of those kind of streets. And so as I walked along it, I thought, this is probably not the kind of place that most young people would hang out, certainly not most young people that we work with. And then you get to the office, and the office has got one of these grand kind of stone staircases that leads up to a heavy black wooden door with a brass door knocker and a brass plate on the outside, which again, not the kind of place that most normal people would have any reason to go to. So, realising that could potentially be quite triggering, would certainly probably be quite intimidating for anyone visiting that building for the first time, never mind someone who may be distressed or upset or feeling apprehensive in any way. And so once someone had navigated that initial trauma, we would invite them in, and one of the receptionists would invite them to take a seat in the entrance hall or the vestibule. That was a rather cold space. It was drafty. It wasn't very inviting. It's a busy space, so there's staff coming up from the basement, there's staff coming down from upstairs levels, there's people coming and going all the time. And the young person would sit there waiting to see who it was that was going to come and see them. And I guess that must have been not ideal experience. And the reception room itself, it wasn't a particularly inviting space. We had partitions up, we had screens up, not because anyone felt that the staff were at any kind of risk from the young people. It was all done back in the day when we thought we needed to protect people's confidentiality, because there was finance staff dealing with payroll, and they were handling some sensitive calls and dealing with some sensitive information. So it was all there for very practical reasons. And the only reason we ever sat young people in the hall was because there wasn't any other space in the building that we could use for that. But from carrying out that exercise, it became really clear that we needed to do something we really needed to address that. And so what we did was we didn't have any space in the office that we could utilise. So we had to be quite creative. So we moved some of the staff around in some of the offices on the upper levels of the building. We also created a few hot desking offices to free up some space. And what that meant was that the admin staff and the finance staff could move upstairs, which created a lot more space in the reception office. And we were able then to get rid of all the partitions and all the screens, and we were able to have nice comfy sofas, and we were able to offer a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a biscuit, but just more importantly, a friendly chat. Just someone who was there just to say, good morning, how are you doing, get a seat. And the impact it had was immediate. Our service user consultations would often flag up that people felt quite scared and quite intimidated until they got to meet their support worker, and then they felt really welcome and safe. And what we began to see right away was people said their initial immediate first impression when they got to Rock Trust was that they were made to feel really safe and really welcome by the reception staff, who gave them a hot drink and just chatted to them. So that was a great win. But then that has a knock-on effect, because what came up at a later PI assessment was that some of the reception staff were, although they were enjoying having more interaction with the young people, there were times when, if young people were coming in and they were particularly distressed or upset or angry, the reception staff felt a little bit unclear or unsure on how to deal with that. And that was causing, at times, them to feel a bit unsafe, but just to kind of feel like they weren't able to do as much as they wanted to do. And the action from that PI assessment was that it would be really helpful for the reception staff to have some additional training. So we've done some trauma-informed practice training. We've done some training on how to deal with challenging behaviour. None of these things cost any money. This was all skills that we had in-house. And so really, all it cost was the time away from the desk for the reception staff to go through the training. And again, the impact of that has been incredible. The young people are getting a much better reception when they come into the office. The reception staff feel much more safe, and they feel much more job satisfaction. The fact that if a young person comes in and they're distressed, they're able to give them that basic level of kindness and have a relationship there with the young people just to make them feel safe and feel calm. Yeah, I think that's it. I just wanted to give a couple examples of how that's had a really quick impact for very little cost, if no cost at all. And hopefully, if anyone's about to embark on a task like this, it's reassuring that it's achievable if you break it down into kind of small steps. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Very, very interesting overview on how to, I suppose, implement a PI strategy or a PI service into what you're currently doing. Just to say to everybody that the webinar chat is open for questions. If anyone would like to put a question forward, that'd be really, really great.